Hello, welcome back to Perspectiva. Now, the United Kingdom is facing one of its most challenging growing seasons in decades, as prolonged heat waves and severe drought take a heavy toll on fruit and vegetable production. But farmers across England and Wales are warning that this year's harvest could be among the worst on record. Weeks of exceptionally hot and dry weather have damaged crops, reduced yields and affected the quality of fresh produce reaching supermarket shelves. Now, consumers may soon begin noticing the impact. Industry experts say that supermarkets are likely to rely on shrinkflation, offering small fruit and vegetables at the same price in an effort to avoid sharp price increases. Now, vegetables, including broccoli, lettuce and other fresh produce, have all been perfected. Crops have struggled to grow under intense heat and limited rainfall, leaving farmers with lower yields and produce that often fails to meet normal retail standards. Now, the effects are already being felt throughout the supply chain, with supermarkets importing more fresh vegetables from overseas to fill the gap left by poor domestic harvests. But what exactly is happening on farms, and why is this year's weather having such a dramatic impact on food production? Well, we'll take a closer look in this package.
Behind the shrinking vegetables and disappointing harvest lies a much larger story, one driven by extreme weather, prolonged drought and the increasing pressures of climate change. Successful crop production depends on a delicate balance of rainfall, soil moisture and moderate temperatures. This year, however, much of the United Kingdom has experienced months of exceptionally low rainfall combined with repeated periods of extreme heat. As the soil dries out, crops struggle to absorb enough water and nutrients to grow normally. Plants become stressed, slowing their development and producing smaller vegetables and fruits with lower overall quality. High temperatures make matters even worse. Heat speeds up evaporation from both the soil and the plants themselves, meaning crops lose moisture faster than it can be replaced. Even farms with irrigation systems face difficulties as rivers, reservoirs and groundwater levels continue to fall during prolonged drought. The result is visible across many farms. Broccoli heads are smaller than usual, lettuces have failed to reach expected sizes, while other vegetables and fruit have suffered from heat stress, reduced yields and quality defects. Lower production doesn't only affect farmers, it impacts the entire food supply chain. With fewer locally grown vegetables available, supermarkets increasingly turn to imports from countries such as Spain to maintain supplies. While imports help fill shortages, they also increase transport costs and leave consumers more vulnerable to price fluctuations. Experts say these conditions are becoming increasingly common as climate change drives hotter summers and longer periods without rainfall. Agriculture is among the sectors most exposed to these changing weather patterns, with farmers now facing growing uncertainty over future harvests. To adapt, many are investing in improved irrigation systems, water storage, drought-resistant crop varieties, and more climate-resilient farming practices. However, these solutions require time, investment, and continued support. As extreme weather becomes more frequent, ensuring reliable supplies of fresh fruits and vegetables is emerging as one of the biggest challenges facing agriculture in the years ahead.
But the impact of this year's drought extends well beyond fruit and vegetable fields. Lower harvests of cereal crops and oilseeds are also expected to affect livestock feed, vegetable oils, breakfast cereals and a wide range of food products, placing additional pressure on the UK's food supply chain. Now, meteorological data shows that England and Wales have experienced one of their driest periods on record, with drought conditions now affecting large parts of both countries. Rainfall has fallen for well below seasonal averages, while repeated heat waves have accelerated the loss of moisture from already dry soils. Agricultural experts warn that if these weather patterns continue, consumers could face not only smaller fruits and vegetables, but also higher food prices and greater dependence on imported produce in the years ahead. Now, the situation also highlights a broader global challenge. As climate change increases the frequency and the intensity of extreme weather events, countries all around the world have been forced to rethink how food is being grown, protected and supplied. For farmers, adapting to a changing climate is no longer a future concern. It's become an immediate necessity. And for consumers, the effects may soon be visible every time they visit the supermarket. To examine how prolonged heat waves and severe droughts are affecting agriculture, food production and the future of farming, we're joined by Mariam Shabir-Abbasi, a climate policy and sustainability expert. Mariam, hello and welcome to Perspectiva. So this year's harvest has been described as one of the worst on record. What factors have made this growing season just so challenging for the farmers?
Well, we have seen that there was a forecast of El Nino as well this year, which is going to be worse next year as well. And in general, the global emissions around the world has caused unpredictable weather patterns. You look at the weather patterns, you see hailing during spring season and erratic rainfalls even during spring season that causes, immature fruits to get damages, and also the erratic rainfall are becoming late. The monsoon season is also late, and dry weather conditions during the summer, and summers have prolonged, and there are like heat waves. So there are like multiple kind of climate extremes and climate changing happening around the world. And that is kind of impacting everything, including agricultural production too, and once the weather patterns have changed over the decades, now you can see that there is shift in sowing and cultivation of crops, but there is like unpredictable kind of weather patterns too that is confusing farmers, that when they should be planting, when they should be harvesting, and when they should be storing, and how they should be storing their crops. And in general, they are affecting like global food supply chains, not only at local level but also at regional and international levels too.
Well, how exactly do prolonged heat waves and drought affect the growth, the quality and the yield of the fruit and veg?
If you see pattern in many regions of the world, what is happening is that there are like prolonged heat waves and higher temperatures, and that causes the moisture in topsoil to evaporate, and after that, when it rains, the soil doesn't have capacity to absorb water. So the soil and the fields are not really like feasible or ready for crops, and what happens that yield is impacted, and if you look at the patterns around the world now, what is happening that higher heat waves are putting crops into stress, that is called like heat stress as well, and there are like dry spells around the year, which is causing water scarcity or unavailability of water for a lot of farmers around the world and in different regions which are particularly vulnerable because of climate change. And also the quality of crops or yield, whether it's vegetables or staple crops, or you can say like rice, or you name like any variety fruits as well. The quality is really reducing because of these climate change patterns, and that is ultimately impacting health of many, and that is causing trouble to access nutrition, which is required for different age groups as well, and leading to malnourishment as well, because lots of people are not having access to food or right nutritions because of unavailability in the market or price hikes in the markets. For example, in 2024, there was 84% hike in the prices of tomatoes and onions, which is very basic in India. And there are many examples around the world which has like there is like sudden hike in price because of these climate extremes, because that is impacting the yield of different crops and vegetables and fruits around the world.
Consumers are hearing the term shrinkflation more often. Why are supermarkets choosing smaller produce instead of immediately raising prices?
Yeah, it's I would say it's a market strategy. What happens that when there is like gap between demand and supply when it comes to these food products and food items. If you increase price, a lot of consumers would react to that, or maybe would not decide to purchase it. But what is happening is that what they do is that they reduce the volume or size of the food products or food items without changing price label on it. So people don't notice, or consumer don't notice at all. And of course, with changing climate as well, what is happening that the quality of fruit and vegetables and crops is also changing, and that is like kind of impacting the size of fruits as well, but also the genetically modified foods on the other hand are also very much in play. And through these mechanisms the volume of food items are also increased, like in terms of size, I'm telling, not in terms of like prices, because when the weight increases, the price also increases. But generally that's how the market works, so that people don't get panic. And because around 800 million people around the world, you have to like look at the demand side as well, and the supply food chains really work on those mechanisms to absorb price shocks in general.
But what are the wider consequences of poor fruit and veg harvest for food availability, prices, and the overall supply chain?
Well, if you look around the world, the inequality is increasing when it comes to access to the food, and the kind of food because of changing climate it doesn't have like right nutritional value as well. For example, if you particularly look at, for example, in Pakistan, 63% people because of increase in prices or due to climate change or several other factors, they don't have access to food items which are really, really required for a balanced diet. And the wealthiest around the world are consuming more eggs or more cereals than the poor. So lots of people around the world are not having access to food. And also there are lots of other problems too, because, in a lots of countries, what is happening is that the focus is, providing food to food supply chains, which are international markets, instead of like providing people to locally or at country level. So it's not readily available to local people to really consume those foods, so it's quite, I would say, a complex issue to look at, that how the markets are working, how climate change is really impacting, the crop yields and food availability, not only within country but across borders, and how drought, heat waves, even flooding is leading to storage and transportation and harvesting issues around the globe.
Well, many supermarkets are importing more fresh produce from abroad. How sustainable is this approach, and what challenges does it create?
Well, when you look at agriculture sector, it's kind of two-way feedback loop, I would say, because the agriculture sector also contributes to emission. And due to emissions, agriculture sector is also getting impacted, So if you look at the foods which are produced locally and sent out globally, or internationally or regionally, one impact is, of course, it's not available locally. But when you are like sending to other countries or regionally, what is happening is that involves emissions, whether you're doing it by air or by road, that involves a lot of emissions. It requires storage, so that consumes a lot of energy that ultimately goes back to planet Earth. And also it produces, kind of inequality, like I said, when it comes to access to food, because food that is locally produced, if it's not available to local people, then that's a big problem, not only in terms of like leading to food insecurity, but also there would be like a gap in terms of supply in local markets as well, and there would be more demand. So that's going and that's when that leads to hikes in prices because of weather patterns, but also because of unavailability in lots of region around the world locally. So it's very, very important that the food which is produced locally should be first available to local people, so that one can reduce and work towards reducing emissions too,
To what extent is climate change contributing to the increasing frequency of extreme weather events affecting agriculture?
All right. Yeah. Actually, the changing climate is impacting agriculture a lot. If you look at different research studies, there is very recent research studies which claims that, if you reduce global emissions today, there is going to be a decline in agriculture production in the short run by 2050, which is around 8%, and there were like different scenarios that how that is going to impact agriculture sector. So these extreme weather patterns are going to not only affect global south, but also it's going to impact 43% to wealthiest nations as well, because but there would be regions which would be favorable for rice crops production, because the hotter weathers are favorable for crop productions if water is available, because conventionally when you grow rice crops, you require a lot of water. But that's the scenario that that around the world it's going to reduce crop production, because the world is not stopping to reduce global emissions, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we know that the erratic rainfall, heat waves, drought-like conditions, water scarcity in different parts of the world, including Africa, you name Spain, Britain, US, South America, especially Pakistan, India. All these regions are very, very vulnerable to drought-like conditions. And apart from that, the wildfires are adding fuel to existing crisis, and it's kind of the climate change is kind of compounding factors to existing political and economic crisis, and that is going to hit harder on agriculture sector in the longer run and the short term as well.
But what steps can farmers take to adapt to hotter, drier conditions, and what support is needed from the governments and the agricultural sector?
Well, one thing which can be done is, of course, by the governments is to invest in climate smart agriculture and educate farmers around that. In smart agriculture, you can move towards heat resistant crops. You can move towards hydroponic techniques, if water is available, of course, and you can move towards a drip irrigation system too, to stop wastage of or minimize the wastage of water in conventional practices around the world. But even if farmers adapt and mitigate, and governments help, then even then there is going to be climate disaster which is going to impact agriculture. So according to my knowledge and experience, I think we need to practice agricultural practices, and agroecology practices, I would say. And what happens in that you plant crops along with tree canopies as well, which provides kind of shades and which reduces the moisture loss at the topsoil, and which kind of provides kind of ecosystem, to for a lot of crops varieties to survive around the world. And many farmers, I would say, especially in Brazil, are kind of practicing those. So there are multiple kind of ways in which farmers can be trained to move towards conventional practices in combination with modern practices, and that is going to help a little bit to a lot of farmers, and that is going to reduce kind of food insecurity in coming years.
And looking ahead, should consumers expect extreme weather to become a recurring threat to food production? And what does this mean for the future of farming and food security?
Well, we have seen over the decades that, the global emissions are not going to reduce. The rich country and global north are going to emit more and more carbon dioxide emissions, methane emissions, and that is warming planet, at a higher speed, I would say, in the past 1 decade, or if you even look at last 5 years. And many countries are not going to stop, and not moving towards net zero emissions. Same like any weather pattern or weather extremes, the climate change is impacting those, and it's impacting every sector of life, including agriculture sector too. It's going to get more extreme, in many regions of the world. So we are going to be really pushing our planning towards climate doom in a lot of sectors, including agriculture as well.
Thank you so much. Well, that is all for today's edition of Perspectiva. Our thanks go to our guests for sharing their views on Pakistan's largest data centre and its impacts on the nation's digital landscape, and from shedding light on the severe impacts on the hot weather on veg and fruit production in the UK. Please, for more stories and updates, follow us on social media or visit Asiaone News TV. Thanks for watching. I'm Tom Philpot, and we'll see you next time.